Did you know Higher Ed's premier tech conference, Ellucian Live, is almost here? Join industry leaders in New Orleans, March 26th through 29th. Discover insights and game-changing solutions to unlock possibility and drive student success. Register at elive.ellucian.com.
Epic.
3 higher ed authors, 100 plus college and university presidents, dozens of actionable insights for academic leaders. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, is now available on Amazon. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back with you on another episode. For those of you that have picked up the book Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, first of all, thank you for doing so. We are day by day humbled by your support of the book and the project as we interviewed, took to book, as they say, over 125 college and university presidents, including the one I'm going to talk to you today, including one of the 125 is here. One of the things you can do to help us, because people are always emailing me, asking me, what can we do to support you? The book, EdUp. Right now, it'd be huge if you go to Amazon and write us a review of the book, if you like it. And if you don't like it, still write us a positive review, because that's how you can help us. Writing us a negative review does not help us. So don't ask how you can help and then write us a bad review. That makes no sense. And I know that the listeners here make a lot of sense because I know many of you personally. So personally help me help you by giving me a review. And my co-author, Kate Colbert, on Amazon. Of course, buy a book if you haven't, and listen to the podcast if you haven't. I'm not going to tell you what else to do. You can listen if you want. You can buy the book if you want, but if you don't want to, that's okay too. I still love you and I appreciate all the support from all those across the world. We're going to be at some conferences coming up here this summer, and we're going to be speaking at one. And he's I call him a new friend. I think he's from the Italian. He's got a little Italian behind his name too. He's in Florida, said with an A. If you're from New York, you say Florida with an A. He says Florida like that. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. He's the executive director of the United States Distance Learning Association. He's Pat Casella. Pat, welcome back.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. Scott, nice to meet you.
See now, wait, before anybody says anything, this is what happens when I have first-time guest co-hosts on, which you are my first-time guest co-host. You blow the whole guest intro because I hadn't introduced the guest yet. But this is why EdUp is so good, because we leave in all the mistakes, because that is what we do as people, and that is what we do in higher education. We make mistakes. And we serve students in the end. They don't need to see our mistakes. So we leave all the bits, all those things in. But Pat, you're 0 for 1. We're starting out at 0 for 1.
That's okay.
All right.
Fantastic.
You're still in the game, though. You're still in the game. I'm going to bring my guest to the table quick before Pat makes any other mistakes. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. He's Scott Pulsifer. He is the president of Western Governors University. Scott, welcome back to the EdUp Experience.
Joe, it's great to be back. Pat, it's great to be with you as well. I don't mind the mistakes. Joe clearly doesn't either, but it certainly makes it real. And I appreciate that. Would be actually impressive if anyone could have guessed that I was going to be the guest on the podcast just by him saying, "Nice to meet you, Scott." I imagine there are several other Scotts in higher education that you likely have. So.
It's very possible that there is, but there's only one Scott Pulsifer, president of Western Governors University, and that's you. And by the way, for anybody who has ever listened to this podcast and started with us on a journey a long time ago, by the way, what's really funny now is mistakes. After I gave Pat all that garbage about making a mistake, I forgot to turn on a button in Zoom that allows the sound effects to come through on the computers of my guests. So there were applause buttons that you probably didn't hear, or maybe didn't hear. And then I've been hitting other buttons that you probably didn't hear. And I've been laughing and you haven't. See how that works? So we're going to leave that mistake in too.
Amazing.
You probably heard that one a little better. All right. So Scott was the very first president that came on the EdUp Experience back in, I think, April of 2020. And we were literally 1 month into pandemic realignment, or whatever you want to call it. And what made that special about that time was the first president we interviewed, you, Scott, with a university engineered to be pandemic proof, and simultaneously kind of opening the floodgates that it's okay for a president to come on a podcast and really talk about their business, which was great for the EdUp experience. So
Yeah.
welcome back. And how are things going?
Thank you for that welcome, and things are going just great. I would hesitate to say that we designed to be pandemic proof. I don't. If we knew a pandemic was going to be coming, then we would have probably been one of the best prognosticators out there. But we
You're
didn't.
Engineered for it.
Engineered for it. I think in
yeah.
many ways, like we certainly we designed and engineered for scenarios or circumstances and needs of our students that a pandemic amplified. That's the way I'd put it, is like those needs became amplified significantly because of the pandemic. And when we were designed and engineered to meet those needs and deliver that value proposition, the pandemic certainly positioned WGU in a way that we did not anticipate ourselves. And I think most in the industry are also discovering that the delivery mode of online is incredibly beneficial. Even if the first iterations for many of the institutions occurred during the pandemic, even then, the students were discovering the benefits of flexibility and the personalization that afforded them. And so it was just kind of nice in many ways to see how that catalyzed innovation at a pace that had not previously been seen. So here we are, mostly on the other side of that, but with a lot of heightened now expectations for value and for experience and affordability and so many other things from students that were arguably mostly on the other side of that pandemic and now in a much better position than we were before. That's speaking not only of WGU, but as the sector as a whole.
Nailed it.
Talk a little bit about the last 3 years. Recap that for me in 1 minute, Scott. No. But you go through the pandemic. We'll fast forward through that because I think that conversation has been had appropriately. Now we get to the other side of this. We know that there's this value conversation. It's at the center of everything we are saying and doing around higher education right now. And there's really interesting things happening. Sides almost being taken where, education, degreed education doesn't have as much value. Go through the skills pipeline. The degreed institutions saying, don't go through the skills pipeline. You're not going to get what you need. You're going to need the degree later. Some in-betweens. WGU has kind of wrapped itself around this conversation in a lot of ways. Can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, the divisiveness that exists and really a lot of confusion for a student on what to do?
Yeah, I think taking the perspective of the individual, the student, and whether that is a prospective student or a current student, I believe the data, and that data is that it shows that 3/4 of them are actually attending a post-secondary program or are currently enrolled in a post-secondary program with a very explicit intent to get a better job or a better opportunity. That is, I think, fundamental to the value proposition of education, is that if you acquire the knowledge, skill, and ability in this educational pathway, it will enable you to acquire an opportunity that will allow you to advance your life in a way that you previously could not. I think that's core to our also societal belief, meaning in the US, I think even the underwriting of it by the federal student aid model is on the assumption that those who acquire education are in fact advancing their opportunity and they're acquiring that opportunity, such that it is about time, arguably, that we have a greater conversation about whether that value proposition is being delivered. We at WGU talk about that as the promise of education, and we are certainly endeavoring to reinvigorate that promise, not just for the privileged, but for every individual, that education fundamentally has to be an engine of mobility, both economic and social mobility. And so I don't care whether you're an existing institution delivering degree pathways or whether you're an emerging and alternative provider that's introducing micro-credential and other credential pathways. Regardless of what you're providing, that pathway actually does have to result in opportunity. Otherwise, the core value proposition of being an engine of mobility is like, it's not going to work. And so I would argue that historically that it has been the truth that degrees have been a credential that affords mobility. In many ways, it's provided optionality to individuals, even if the degree they got wasn't directly relevant to a profession they were going to pursue. It still presented value in a way that that there was probably few alternatives out there. Now, having said that, the costs of that, the accessibility of it, the success rate of it, like, it's calling into question a lot of that value proposition. And many individuals are starting to wonder whether, is there an alternative?
Yikes!
And yeah, and there are certainly many who are starting to say, you know what, the cost of that one and is not going to be affordable for me. And I see that an increasing number of employers are seeking those who might have credentials or certifications in certain fields that I can still get a great job that's going to be earning me $50,000, $60,000, $75,000 or more a year. And I can do that in 1 year at a cost of $20,000 or less, hopefully. And that may be a better alternative than spending $100,000 to get a bachelor's degree over 4 years and hoping that at the end of that it all works out. And so I think that regardless, again, of whether it's a new and emerging credential pathway or an existing credential pathway, we have to still go back to the core assumption that a student has, which is, I'm doing this so that I can get a better job and advance my economic and social mobility. And we should be holding ourselves accountable to delivering on that promise.
I like your style, dude.
A lot said there. And Pat, I know you've been waiting to jump in.
Now it's your turn.
Yeah, no. I noticed, that Western Governor, one of the things that you had there was a big focus on data-driven learning, right? And I did research you a little bit, Scott. I do admire your background because it's very similar to mine. VP of Product Management. You worked in the technology sector for a long time. Can you dive into this data-driven learning a little bit more? What are some of the stats that you're actually looking at that are really important to the university?
Before you answer, let me just prime it. Well, hold on. Let me just prime this because I have the right sound effect for it.
You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you.
Okay, Pat, now go.
There you go. So, Pat, it starts with this, I think, premise is that we believe that every individual has inherent worth and that they have different approaches and styles and ways through which they progress through a journey. We're providing an experience around learning and the acquisition of knowledge, skill, and ability. We make no presumption that every individual somehow is going to go through that in the exact same way. And that means that our primary obligation is to figure out how to personalize and adapt how we deliver that learning so that we increase the probability that every individual can succeed. For us to do that, it fundamentally requires or depends upon understanding how individuals are experiencing what we're delivering. And so we have data on everything from, I would put it simply like this: progress, persistence, completion, and return for graduates. So when we're looking at the journey for students, we're looking at, what is the pace at which individuals are traversing their particular courses? What is the engagement rate they have with the different learning resources that are part of that course? What particular content areas are they actually utilizing at which higher rates, et cetera? We look at pre-assessment performance and how, which questions are presenting more challenges, which ones are actually showing good success rates on. We look at, first attempt pass rates of assessments. And all these things, what we're looking at is just trying to understand how different individuals are actually moving towards proficiency so that we can start individualizing the experience from an instructional standpoint, mentoring standpoint, et cetera. We then look at course completion rates, the pace of course completion rates in a term. We look at how individuals are progressing through that term so that we know are individuals progressing at a pace that's right for them. So that we even look at what is the percentage of students that are completing a term or the set of courses at their personal pace, knowing that not everyone has the same pace. And so we're looking at all this data, and the reason we're doing is we're trying to figure out what is the right mentoring approach, what's the right sequencing of courses, what's the right set of learning resources, what are the right sort of evaluation feedback that every individual needs, so that we can actually increase the probability that each one of them is successful in completing their credential. Because if they're not, then we're not able to deliver on that promise of education, which is that credential is ultimately going to be the key thing that you're going to attain so that then you can actually attain the opportunity. And we're even investing more and more now in that kind of what I refer to as the last mile. These rising graduates, how are they actually accessing information about opportunities, employers and roles, et cetera? What kind of career enablement services are we providing, and how are they utilizing them? Because we ultimately know that for that credential to have value, they have to acquire the opportunity as well. And so we're looking more and more at that as well. So I would say that, when you instrument that entire like student journey from prospect all the way to an employee, like if we can instrument in a way that we can see and understand how they're experiencing it, then we're going to actually instrument it so that we have that data and we can make informed decisions about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you're far from asleep at the wheel, right? You have that data at your fingertips. Trend-wise, what are you seeing as far as students these days, as far as how long does it take for them between enrollment and graduation? What's that looking like?
Yeah, one of the interesting things is even just during the pandemic that there's two things that are occurring, I would say. One is the enrollment at WGU in particular is diversifying pretty significantly. And so historically, I'll just give you a couple tidbits of data around this. 5+ years ago, the percentage of our students that were actually, traditionally aged, meaning under the age of 22, and seldom had credits to transfer in. Like that was only about 5% of our student population were under 22, and even less, like less than 3% would be considered a first-time full-time student. But fast forward to today, that number is about 12% of our total enrollment. And the number of students that are now transferring in 0 credits because they've had no prior college or they've not completed any prior courses is also increasing as a percent of total enrollment. And so we're seeing these individuals, they're just starting with, even if the time is variable, they're just starting with more credits that have to be completed before they actually attain a credential. And so that is increasing the overall average time that students at WGU are taking to complete their credential. Not because necessarily that the students that we were serving before are taking more time themselves, just because the diversification of our enrollment. The other thing that we are absolutely seeing is that the flexibility of time and pace is actually a real benefit. When the pandemic significantly increased the pressures from family and caring for children, had disruptions to their jobs and to their economic situations, that our flexibility to let individuals kind of ebb and flow, like I can go fast and slow, like that also is changing the kind of, cycle time, if you will, by which students are traversing their programs. And so we've seen that elongate a little, but not substantially so that it's dramatically impacting their cost to complete degrees at WGU or their overall completion rates, et cetera. So we're seeing those dynamics occur, but back to our point is we're utilizing all that data about how different types of individuals who come in with different credits or start at different points and also learn in different ways, that we're now increasingly personalizing the journey so that we can also improve the outcomes for them as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your
Attention.
It's time for us to solve the puzzle of success in higher education. Get your ticket to Ellucian Live for industry insights, powerful connections, and innovative solutions. From March 26th through 29th, join peers from around the world in New Orleans to unlock the possibility and drive student and institutional success. Learn more and register at elive.ellucian.com. It's time to
Level up.
The beginning of a new era in higher education begins with you. Order your copy of Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education by Kate Colbert, Dr. Joe Salustio, with contributions by Elvin Freitas. It's higher education's must-read book of 2022. Discover how you can seize the moment to change higher education forever. Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, now available on Amazon. For bulk orders, contact Kate, Joe, or Elvin.
No, that's a great model.
Wow.
And Joe, you've got to add the give them what they want. Yeah.
Oh, no, I've got this one instead.
Oh, okay.
Listen to my important question.
That's how I transition back to me. Scott, I was waiting to use that one. I'll tell you. Time. Go to your website, and the first 2 bits on the hero image are about time. It's time and pace. And you brought that up. You just said it 3 or 4 times in different orders. And one of the points I make in the book that I wrote, shamelessly plugging Commencement at the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education now, is that speed becomes more of a differentiator than anything else as we continue to move forward. By and large, we are all nonprofit institutions accredited by accreditors that are regional. Sometimes the instructors that teach for one institution as adjunct teach for another. Now, that's not to say that the educational quality from institution to institution is exactly the same. That's not what I'm saying. There are absolute differences in it. I think a lot of those differences come from support. You know, an MBA course and an MBA course that teaches business, is one better than the other, or is the support better? Is the tools better, the technology better? So there's a lot of parity. It's kind of like a field of 64 in the March Madness. There's a lot of parity. What differentiates one institution from the next? And in my mind, and I want to know if you agree, it's speed. It's the way that the institution responds to the student and the opportunities they give to the student to move faster, which is becoming more and more an expectation of life. Right? Just flip your phone for 3 seconds and move video to video. What do you think about all that? Do I know anything what I'm talking about? Or be kind.
That's like asking me to talk about social media and its influences, like from someone who doesn't use social media and who reads about its impact versus experience its impact. I think there is a fairly strong conclusion that you're making there, that there are differentiators that exist within institutions now that are on the basis of urgency or pace of response or speed of delivery, et cetera. And the reason I think that's true is because there's the most scarce resources that individuals have is in fact time. And there's a couple conflicts that arise now, increasingly so because of that. And one of those is just simple to call out that I would highlight, which is the percentage of individuals enrolled in post-secondary programs today that are working learners and over the age of 24 is growing faster than those individuals who are traditional age, who are full-time, who have really no other obligations. They don't have dependents. They may be working part-time, but they may be still, supported by families, but they're reasonably unencumbered by other responsibilities the same way a working learner is who's over the age of 24. And that already is nearly approaching 45%, and it's growing faster than the population that are traditionally aged, rising high school graduates, if you will. And when you consider the context of that individual is like, well, how many of them really have the luxury of 4 years, arguably average time 5 years plus, to complete a bachelor's degree so that they can advance their economic prospects? No one has that kind of time when you're working full time and you have a child and you have family. You're like, no one has that kind of time to say, oh yeah, let me just unplug from all those other obligations. And so what we as institutions need to be figuring out, increasingly so, this is true for not just WGU, but everyone. How do you help individuals fit the acquisition of knowledge, skill, and ability, education, into their already busy lives? Well, one of the ways in which you do that is you can compress time. And you can compress time in two ways. You can actually introduce short form credentials that have real market value. Second, you can actually make it possible for them to learn and acquire and demonstrate the proficiency at a pace that's commensurate with the knowledge, skill, and ability they already acquired through work and everything else. And so it'd be false to compare an individual who is 18 years old and just finished high school, who actually may need time to develop proficiency, versus someone who already has 10 years of experience in a particular field for which they have no degree yet. You really want that 10-year-older individual to sit in a class for 16 weeks with 3 lectures a week and say, oh no, both of you are going to take the same amount of time to develop proficiency in this field? Like, no way. I'm like, no, educator on the planet should be assuming that would actually be the same experience. And yet we have ourselves beholden to this model of credit hours, seat time, term, and that puts a lot of constraints on the speed and urgency with which institutions can respond to the ever-changing dynamics of the learners that they're serving.
Before I send it back to you, Pat, I want to ask Scott a personal question. Well, it's more of a leadership question, not a personal question. But I want to know, Scott, let's put it like this. You have a job that many within higher education go, holy crap. Like, how does it, holy crap, how does someone do this? The massive, 100, almost 200,000 students, a massive amount of employees. You're in front of Senate committees and panels. You're leading some of the most innovative leaders in higher education. How has Scott changed over the last 3 years since the last time you were on this podcast? This is not a pandemic related question. It's a leadership related question. You take it how you want it. How are you different now than you were 3 years ago?
Joe, thank you for that question. I think it's a really good one, and one that allows me some space a little bit to contemplate the difference in the leadership approach that I have today versus what it was originally. There are two things at least come to my mind. I think first and foremost, I think about my primary responsibility as the president of WGU is to motivate and inspire our great people to do the great things they already want to do. And I think that's actually the most important thing I have, meaning that's very different than saying, oh, I, as the leader, also have to dictate the strategy, I have to dictate all the priorities, the initiatives, all the activities and execution that we're doing. It's like, I'm not saying presidents don't get themselves involved in that, but my primary obligation is to motivate and inspire our great people to do the great things that I want to do. Why? Because I mostly am trying to ensure that we are only increasing our alignment at an emotional level with our mission and purpose at WGU. And if I start with the presumption is like every individual is at WGU because they believe in the purpose and mission of WGU to change lives for the better by creating pathways to opportunity. If we're all starting with that same premise, then I can trust that all of us are already trying to do the right thing. We're trying to think with the student in mind in all the things we're trying to do. We're trying to deliver against our key results of completion, return for graduates, and equity in both. Like we are always, each one of us are striving to think about how are the ways that we have to do that and how do we need to do them differently, do them better, stop doing certain things, et cetera, so that we deliver on that core purpose, such that that's something I focus on more and more every day is like just motivating, inspiring our people to do a great thing. Now, the second thing I think has been really important is that we are always advancing a culture of innovation at WGU. And this idea that in doing that, I think my responsibility has become increasingly not about directing where that innovation needs to occur, but asking good questions to help others unlock how they think about doing what we do. And a simple example is just how we are just, contemplating the effect of time and how we've structured it. And you're like, well, what if we just thought differently about that? What if we think differently about delivering the value of a credential? What if we think differently about the mode of learning and the instructional models? How would we think differently? And that includes, by the way, a lot of conventional models of which we do things at WGU. And so I think what I'm trying to do there more and more is not try to provide the direction, if you will, but ask good questions so that the leaders and individuals across WGU can think differently about how they're doing what they're doing and even create new ways. Their innovation is two types: creating something entirely new that didn't exist before. And the second innovation is like, no, you're going to dramatically improve the way in which we're doing something already. And we need to do both. And so in my role in that regard is not to say, hey, Scott just divined a new way in which we're supposed to do something, and now I need all of you to go execute it. You're like, actually, no, I'm trying to say, hey, how do we think about this differently? What different angle and perspective do we take? What challenging questions can I pose so that those who are trying to answer the questions are realizing that maybe how we've done it for 25 years is not how we need to do it, and we're going to start doing it differently. That to me is actually where a lot of the fun happens, because we're just going like, oh yeah, we're going to try this. We only have a 50-50 shot that's going to work, but we're going to do it anyway because we need to learn. And we're going to, back to Pat's point, is like, we're going to get all the data about how we chose to do it and see whether it worked or not. And we're holding ourselves accountable to ensure that the innovation that we're driving is actually having impact. Otherwise, like I've said in congressional testimony, otherwise, is like innovation that doesn't work is just a bad idea. And so we want to ensure that the innovation we're driving has more good ideas than bad ones, but we at least hold ourselves accountable to identify the bad ones as much as the good ones. And so anyway, so hopefully that
That's
gives
a
you
lot
some
of great
perspective as
self-reflection.
to,
I love that. That was
yeah.
great. And I love when somebody comes, and I know so many leaders out there and innovators, when somebody comes and says, you know what, we could do this different. Can we break this and rebuild it? It's like, yes.
Yeah.
You know what? Take the Play-Doh out, build something new. And Pat, you see this all the time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As an engineer, I live it too. I want to go back to what you said, Joe, about speed, right? And the speed being the primary driving factor. And I'd say speed probably has a cousin called flexibility. And flexibility is really what students want these days, right? I think we're seeing it. And Scott, you were certainly alluding and talking about it, right? They want to be able to take a course wherever they want, whenever they want, however they want, given different mediums and whatnot. Talk to me a little bit. I'm my background. I actually was in a program called co-op, where I went to school for one term, scrounged up that money. I didn't have somebody financing me, so parents said, "You want to go to school? Go get your money and put yourself through school." So I did, and then I signed up for that co-op program. So it was one term in school, and then I got recruited to United Technologies, and lo and behold, before I knew it, I was within 3 months in a great time. I was one of the senior guys there. Crazy people were leaving, going for other jobs and whatnot. That tight tie between university and community, and especially the business side of it, the company side of it, where is that going? Right? Is there a day we're going to have sometime where you're getting credits for working? Is that a possibility? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the one, I love that. I nearly did something similar to what you did, at least for a term, but I had learned about the co-op when I was in my undergraduate program, and I think it's an incredibly valuable model. The reason I say that is we also have programs in our School of Health, as well as our School of Education, where practicum, clinicals in nursing, demonstration teaching, like, they're so fundamental to actually help the individual learn how to apply the knowledge and skills that they acquired academically. Like, oh, you actually have to put them into application. I think that's partly even the approach to a Socratic method of learning, is like, well, you may have all this information, but now we're going to test how well you apply it in a scenario. And so my hope is that we actually see the resurgent conversations about apprenticeships, the resurgent conversations around credit granted to work-based learning, the resurgent conversation that we see around vocational credentials. Vocational is let me set that aside for a bit, but I want to talk more about that because we've done a disservice to even the thinking around vocation in the US, because vocational tech was somehow different, or a different, pathway to opportunity that was somehow constrained or different than the academic pathway. But all these resurgent conversation, my hope is that it actually does deepen its roots into our dialogue around what the future learning to work life cycle actually has to look like. Because we recognize increasingly that if you move to skills-based model, then I, as an individual, am acquiring skills in all different types of experiences, academic ones, the work-based one, other experiential-based ones, military, for example. A skills-based model says, well, you have to award credit for the acquisition of skills regardless of where they're acquired, because it's fundamentally about what you know, not how you came to know it. It's about the capability you have, not how you develop those capabilities. Now, interestingly, in an academic context, we still need to solve somewhat for the credit granting to that knowledge and skill that's acquired in places that weren't academic in nature. The way we do that at WGU is our competency-based education model, is that you can actually accelerate through courses in which you already have mastered that. And so other ways we do it is we articulate credit from a lot of different sources, including ACE, for example, that does a lot of credit granting to military experiences and others. What we need to go one step further, which is now direct granting of credit to work-based experiences. Well, the way you have to do that is you still have to introduce assessments beyond just observation. Meaning, hey, I've seen this person do this work, et cetera. They seem good at it, versus I also need to have assessments of that so I can have verification of that. And that's where even criterion-based reference assessments start to skill up or start to take root. think of just certifications that exist in technical fields like CompTIA certifications or cybersecurity certifications by the NSA or NICE. Like those can exist and they can broaden, and there's no one precluded from being certified. Like I can sit for that certification having never gone through a single course at a university. It's like, great. And as soon as we get that verification of skills, like it makes it really easy to start attaching credit to that. That is going to be a really good thing for increasing equity and equal kind of, recognition of skill. Until then, we're still beholden to that degree as this very blunt force instrument that says somehow it's the only marker that someone possesses knowledge, skill, and ability. And we know that's very limited. And so that's a long answer to say I'm still hopeful. I'm not certain yet, but I think that if the conversation turns towards action, then we'll get increasingly hopeful that that will take root.
No,
Scott, it's been a while, but we do end our episodes with the same two questions of every guest. And in fact, we wrote a book on one of them, right?
Yeah.
And we might do that again. And you might be in it twice now since you came out. How about that? What else do we need to know about WGU that we didn't go over today? Could be something coming up, a conference you're attending, a new program you're launching. You want to just love on your staff for 2 minutes. The microphone is yours. Say whatever you want. Anything coming up, I don't care. It's yours to plug away. And either before or after, what do you see as the future for higher education?
Yeah. Let me hit on two things. And what I think is going to be really compelling about some of the things we're continuing to advance at WGU at an accelerated pace. And that's truly around personalization of learning. And there's two dimensions that I want to highlight. And it's really around student lifecycle management and the kind of flexible consumption model that we see ever increasing need for because of how, again, the pandemic has catalyzed some of the things that we ourselves even saw. But Pat, I'll even go back to something you said, flexibility, like that still remains the core operative word here that says, this is in higher demand now than it ever has been. And we know that if we invest in personalization in two particular areas, the modularity of curriculum, so the individuals are actually acquiring the size of the credential that they need to advance their opportunity or their access to opportunity, is going to be changing at increasing pace, such that we see degrees absolutely being increasingly valuable, but at the same time that we see the credentialing that's going to occur will be increasingly modular. What does that mean? We certainly see short form credentials increasing in value. We as a credit granting institution believe we can differentiate that in that way in a significant manner. But we also know that that can't be a cul-de-sac of opportunity. Like you have to be able to build upon that. You have to be able to transfer it, stack upon it, et cetera. But we see that personalization coming. The other dimension of personalization is fundamentally about the student journey and the learning, is that these individuals are going at different paces and different sequence of courses with different mentoring and instructional needs. And technology is playing a huge role in enabling our faculty to have those timely and relevant engagement with the students that they're serving, so that we're seeing an expectation of a dramatic increase in our completion rates and our pace and progress rates. And ultimately, why are we doing that? Why? Because the diversification of the population of individuals that we're serving is going up dramatically. We love that because we do believe WGU fundamentally is expanding access, especially to those historically underrepresented and underserved groups. And as we do that, they should have every expectation that their probability of success is the same as the individuals who may be from higher income strata or who may be their white peers if it's a person of color, et cetera. Like there should be none of that is a determinant of your inherent worth and the probability that you should succeed at WGU. And so we see that personalization of the journey being critical. On your second question, Joe, and the other thing is like, what gets us really excited about the future? It continues to be the skills-based architecture that we think it's fundamental to designing both the learning and the work in the future. We're only at the beginning of this conversation, only those early adopters. I see them as making an incredible moving declarative statements, whether it's Governor Hogan in Maryland, or whether it's the Federal Department of Labor, or whether it's certain states saying, we're going to skills-based hiring, but they're not yet enabled to do all of that, but they are making very clear direction setting statements that says this is a future we believe in. We have tons of hidden talent and hidden workers out there. We need them more active and engaged in the opportunity that we know when they're engaged in the opportunity, it only expands it. We need to have a more clear, consistent, and equitable model by which we advance the capabilities of individuals and open up opportunities to every individual, regardless of how they acquired their skills. And that is something that we believe WGU should be a key contributor to. And so that's something I think we continue to be excited about as an influencer that certainly will benefit our operations as a degree granting institution. But we believe it's fundamental to changing and transforming the whole notion of the education to work life cycle, if you will.
Wow. There was a lot there. There was a lot said between the three of us. You said most of it, Scott, which is why you're here, but so insightful, so well put. And you speak so well about access and affordability and the reach that higher education can have, the promise, the reinvigoration of higher education, of education in general. It gets all the passions. It gets passion with me cooking. I can't imagine how your staff feels. I can see why you're so inspirational to those that you work with. And I know many of them, and they all say great things about you. And I'm like, I know him. It's fine. I know Scott. It's fine. It's like my buddy. I call him on the weekends. Somebody else I call on the weekends is my guest co-host. This is the way it was supposed to sound. He's Pat Casella, Executive Director of the U.S. Distance Learning Association. Now I got to cut it and put it at the beginning. Pat, thanks for co-hosting with me.
My pleasure, Joe.
Did you have a good time here, Pat?
Had a great time. And Scott, really, I should never have put your name out there in the beginning. Joe will remind me, next time. But
Yes.
yeah, I'm sure Scott and I probably could have sat here and talked for another couple of hours, right? We have the same common interest. And like I said, our backgrounds are very, very similar on the engineering side. So.
Oh yeah, there's so much opportunity for innovation and advancement in this overall education workspace. We've only begun to, I think, scratch the surface in all the different ways in which we can actually change things for the better, and put increasingly across the whole sector, put the student at the center as the primary beneficiary of our endeavor to expand access to high quality education so they can change their lives for the better. And the more we can put emphasis and focus on that, I think the more we'll see the whole sector really continue to transform itself for the future.
And there he is, ladies and gentlemen. He's Scott Pulsifer. He is president of Western Governors University, the first president ever interviewed on the EdUp Experience podcast. Thank you, Scott, for being you. Your team offered you up for another hour. I was like, I don't know. Scott's going to get tired of me. The sound effects are probably too much for him. So I was like, we should cap it at an hour. But I really do appreciate you and everything that you're doing in the industry to lead, to show the way towards access, to accountability, for other institutions, and to do it with such a good attitude and authenticity, which I think is important in any leader today.
Thank you for that, Joe. It's definitely been great to be with you. And I'm certain we could always go longer, but it's also for your viewing audience or your listening audience, that it'll probably save them some time and their own anguish, if you will, listening to us go on and on about what the future could be. But it's been a real pleasure to be with you both.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for some
amazing
news. It's time to work together to solve the puzzle of success in higher education. Ellucian Live returns to New Orleans from March 26th through 29th to help you unlock possibility for your institution. And yes, the EdUp Experience will be there recording live. Industry leaders from all across the world are converging to discover new insights, game-changing solutions, and powerful connections, all with the goal of addressing higher ed's greatest opportunities and biggest challenges. You do not want to miss Ellucian Live. Learn more and secure your seat today at elive.ellucian.com. It will be
amazing.
You know that the world of higher education is experiencing evolutions and revolutions. You want to be part of the progress. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education with insights from more than 100 college and university presidents, will show you how. Get your copy of Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education now on Amazon right away. We think you're going to love it. It's
Amazing.